So why don't we go ahead and talk about those two old best decks first? So Vanquish Soul first things first. I think Vanquish Soul is taking significant from this ban list consistency wise. I played this deck at 2 regions, and I think consistency was already the biggest problem. Because for Vanquish Soul in particular, not really enough to just see the K9 cards. Like these together, some sort of K9 combo half board was never really enough to win access to Vanquish Soul cards. Using 2 copies of Raisin and 2 copies of is harsh. The pure Vanquish Soul deck basically cannot recover from that at all. I think K9 Vanquish Soul, as soon as Doom of Dimension comes out, can recover from it a little bit because K9 monster, which I would assume if you're going to play K9 Vanquish Soul, you're probably going to play copies of it now, because it gives a pseudo starter. Right? K9 Noroi is a normal summon that specials another K9 from the deck, and it the Saryuja Skuldred, which is like a pseudo consistency piece for the deck. Ultimately, though, I think Ken Vanquish Soul suffers a lot. I think it's going to be more like a tier 3 deck. I think simply there's going to be other decks that are better at what it does. I think in the beginning of the format, it could still be performing okay, but I think like the attributes are kind of messed up with only one Raisin. Good fires are very hard to find. We'll have to play the Rescue Ace cards now. The consistency for going first, I think, is very hard to replace. You're going to have to play very suboptimal cards, especially going second. Like drawing cards like 7th Tachyon or Small World in masses is just not going to be. I think it's not a terrible deck, but I wouldn't advise anyone to back Crystal. No, unfortunately. Yami, I think, is still a tier 1 deck. I don't think it's going to be the best deck of the format. I will discuss some of the decks that I think are also going to be very good, and some of them have a pretty good matchup against Yami, which is why I think Yami has tough contention up there, even after Dimension. Yami gets another main deck monster in Doom of Dimension. Also, an extender, it can special summon itself from hand if you monsters. That's pretty good for Yami, and it will replace the consistency that is lost from Obedience. However, I think it's not going to be the best deck because there's going to be some other decks that I'll be discussing in a second that have a pretty good time against Yami, and I think are also benefiting from this ban list a lot. So that's keep that in mind. I think Yami's going to be a strong deck, but it's going to have very strong competition. But it's definitely not dead. You know, one Obedience School, you can make up for it. You can play more consistency cards. Fury Rise map, Sky Striker. I would highly recommend trying Triple Tactics Thrust. I played that at my regional with Yami yesterday. Even that was old ban list, but still thrusting school felt very powerful. Obviously, going to be even more important when Obedience is now at 1, because that's one of your best cards at 1 second. So I think Thrust is going to be a mainstay in the upcoming. Sean, I think Christian K9 is still a good deck. I think that deck suffers less than Vanquish Soul Christian simply because you're not losing as many consistency pieces, and that deck usually a little bit higher on the K9 cards. Compared to Vanquish Soul, K9 cards actually are good starters for the Christian package. You know, you can for Minitrack Ripper Stormer, and that's going to stretch you Scrap Recycler, and that's going to bridge into your Christian cards. Problem with K9 Christian, very hit or miss deck. It either has, like, if you open, like, Dockle Sulfador, very hard to stop it, but at the same time, if you don't open those card combos, then sometimes it struggles, and it has less one-card combos than before, and it also doesn't really synergize super well with 9, I think, because the new 9 uses your normal summon, so you can't really bridge into Christian anymore, right? Because normal summon for the Scrap Recycler, I think. If you go for the normal summon, then you would have to do some weird things, but maybe there's lines for it. Maybe there's lines where you can River Stormer and then still make like Saryuja to summon the Scrap Recycler that way or something. I don't know. There's ways maybe. Well, I think K9 Christian is just fine, and probably the better version of K9 so far. Maybe the best K9 version, but maybe there's also some other experimentation with it. I think that is the one of the more interesting parts about this ban list is like which K9 deck is going to come out on top because the ones that are previously the standard, Christian and Vanquish Soul, have been pretty heavily. Right. Sky Striker is a deck that I personally like a lot. Shocker, I know. And I think it has top tier potential. Top tier potential is kind of like a category that I use tier 1 and 2. That's where I put decks that I think are really good, but I might be wrong depending on how the format plays out, and they might end up being just more like a solid tier option. I think Sky Striker has the potential to something in this format. I think boards without Paradise Smasher are much easier to be broken. As a reference, for example, this deck was able to make top 4 at the World Championships where Paradise Smasher was banned. So I think Sky Striker definitely has what it takes. Decks like Yummy and so on and so forth with Breakers One thing that's a little bit of a problem for it, however, is Roland Lockbird. Roland Lockbird is a big problem for Sky Striker. We've talked about it in the past, and I think it depends a little bit on how popular that card is. And I think it's not going to be a main deck card, so that's good. But I think a lot of people are still going to be siding it, and that might be tough. So we'll see about that. But it's definitely a deck with top tier. Especially with Doom of Dimensions, we've just looked at an OCG metagame report. People are actually playing a Radiant Typhoon Side Trance in this deck, which is basically a draw two cards and then discard a quick play spell from your hand, which fills your graveyard with spells really easily in Sky Striker, and I think that engine is pretty interesting. So that might even help it play through because it's a quick play activated in draw phase. Deck, I think I'm going to try it for sure, and it has some solid White Forest. White Forest, I think, is a very solid combo deck. I think I'm going to put it in tier 2. I don't think it is going to be exceptionally good because I personally think it struggles a little bit going second, but depending
Oh,
on what decks are
fuck
on
me.
top, like Yummy, for example, I think the deck can probably be a word against Yummy going second by playing some breakers. It is a strong deck. It's a strong combo deck. It's very scary when it gets to first. You can also play around board breakers pretty well because that's something that, people have been discussing, should I play board breakers? Should I play hand traps now? I guess we'll wait and see. There's always going to be people preferring hand traps, but some people are messing around with board breakers now because Paradise Smasher is gone. And those you can definitely catch off guard if you play White Forest because that deck makes some pretty disgusting boards that are very hard to break. Similar to Sky Striker, it suffers from Droll, and I think it's weaker going second, so I'm Branded, even with a second Branded Fusion, I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't love Branded. I think Branded can be mixed with Draco Tail, but I consider that more Draco Tail deck than a Branded deck, so I'm gonna bring that up later. I think Branded is fine. I personally don't see a reason to play it if you're just trying to win, but if you like the deck, then I think you can. It's not bad. I think it hovers somewhere between tier 2 and tier 3. I wouldn't really recommend playing Branded, but I also don't Draco Tail. Draco Tail, personally, I'm a believer. I'm a Draco Tail believer. I think this deck is very strong now. I think some of its matchups, whereas like now a lot of its matchups are left over. Like Yami, for example, is a pretty matchup for Draco Tail, as well as the Herald of the Arclight going to 1 is actually a bigger deal than you might think for Draco Tail because something that ended up happening very often. Of course, Draco Tail has to out Herald of Arclight, otherwise you have a problem. So are focusing a lot of effort into outing one herald, and then Yami just makes the second one in May phase 2, and then you can no longer out it because your battle phase is used, and it's really hard for Draco Tail to then play. That's no longer the case. Herald of Arclight is now at 1, so if you just out one herald, you are free to play, and your matchup is actually really good into Yami if you do that. Which is why I also think you should take this with a grain of salt. Is I think there are really good cards out there against Draco Tail. Cards like Retaliating, in some cases also Contact Seed, Barrier, and the ceiling of the deck is not the highest. It needs to be played properly, and it needs to you find games. And Luna Light is potentially good against it because it can make the powers, and Draco Tail kind of has to respect that now. Decks like Gem Knight can go second and maybe power it because the highest. So I think Draco Tail is a top tier deck, but not in the way that we're like it's the best by far. I think it's gonna have its counter plays. It's gonna have good cards against it. People are gonna focus on it more now. But overall, I still think it's a really good deck, and I like it. Smith, I'm very happy, but now basically we actually just talk about the Smith deck because it's finally gone. So a lot of these other combo slop tiles no longer just make Fiendsmith inside their combo. So when I'm saying Fiendsmith, I actually mean the Fiendsmith control deck, basically, right? Which, personally, I think is not very well positioned, unfortunately. I think the Fiendsmith engine in decks that can still use it, like Twins, for example, that have very easy access, you're obviously going to play Fiendsmith, and that's going to be good. But the actual Fiendsmith deck is not that well positioned. It doesn't make broken boards, so like decks like Sky Striker or whatever can probably just overpower it. Caesar is not that good against Yami, but it is good against Draco Tail. So Draco Tail, when you go first, is probably a good matchup for Fiendsmith control, but in general, also hand traps are not that efficient against decks like Yami, and also against Draco. I mean, Ash is good, but if they resolve on Rahu, Draco Tail, what are you gonna do with, like Baylor, Ogre, kind of part? So I think Fiendsmith just doesn't grind well enough against decks like Draco Tail and Yummy, and so I don't consider it super good. Gem Knight is a deck that I definitely know has top tier potential. I personally think that depends on a lot of things. Where like I just don't have enough experience with the deck myself yet to they tell you, yes, it's definitely tier 1, or nah, it's more like tier 2. I think Gem Knight is a strong deck. I definitely think people should respect it because it can break some disgusting boards. And I talked to some people who played Gem Knight before, and they said, like, oh, one of the biggest problems was Paradise Smasher because you just send people first, and then you basically try to 10 by them. And that's no longer going to be problem, Smasher is gone, so you can actually just friggin' play this deck, go second, and OTK very consistently, and then you play Protoss, and if they send you first after siding, you Protoss them, and you can basically read every attribute. So I think it's a scary concept. I think it definitely something to look at, and I think I would advise everyone to look into this deck and also practice against it, because that's one of the differences to Tenpai. It is a very powerful going second deck, so in some games it's going to feel like you can't really do much if they have all the right breakers and combo pieces. But in a lot of games, it's a lot more interactable than Tenpai because they don't have like the cards that say like everything's unaffected or can't activate anything during the battle phase. So in the instance where let's say they don't have the perfect board breaker for your board and they just play into it, you will have choke points. You will have ways to interact with the deck, and for those games, it's going to be very important to understand how this deck works. And this is something that I also have to do myself. But I'm pretty sure it's a strong pick upcoming format, especially considering how the decks up here, like Draco Tail and Yummy, don't make the craziest boards. So going second against them is not going to be the hardest task ever. So yeah, Ryzeal variations. I think Ryzeal variations across the board. Pure Ryzeal probably not powerful enough right now, especially if you play more board breakers. I think Heraldic and Onomat Ryzeal are still like reasonable decks to play. I don't hate them, like if they go first, they still pretty hard. I think using one extra Iceal hurts, but those decks tend to play like 7 or 8 copies of it anyways because you've got Bonfire, 7th Ascension, 7th Tachyon. So they're probably going to be fine in that regard. Jordan Lockbird not being as present in the main decks is definitely good for like over the top combo decks, and Protoss still existing. Decks like Heraldic Ryzeal, like a realistic win con going second as well. So, but I think in general, like those decks are still fine. I don't particularly love them, but I also don't think they're bad. Nine. Here I want to mention two things. Pure Canine, like pure Canine, I think is a tier 3 deck. I think the pure Canine deck just doesn't function super well. It doesn't have the consistency needed. Like, if you think about it, a pure Canine deck, in terms of starters, Troy for K9, Jockle, and 3 Chaotic Elements, but Jockle and Chaotic Elements don't even always work because they are 2-card combos. 12 starters does not make for a good Super K9 deck. On top of that, the Super K9 import isn't even that good. The main quality of K9 was always to be paired with another deck, and then it, I think then we're talking K9 Crystron and K9 Vanquishal being hit quite significantly. I think seen what this K9 deck now is. If someone manages to find good K9 hybrid version, we're talking top tier potential, genuine. I think if someone figures it out, like what is the best K9 version
Rather the
now,
guard.
and actually builds it well for the format, I think we're talking a very good deck. Until then, a pure K9 goes into tier 3. Let it be known that K9 variants, I think, have top tier potential. There is a realistic chance that someone finds something that ends up surprising everybody. And light. Light is hard for me to evaluate. Deck, it's like a paradox. I think the deck has top tier potential. Like I mentioned earlier, Paradise Smasher is gone, and Board Breaker Luna Light was a good strategy also at the World Championships. It got second place. It's just a very good concept in a format where decks don't that crazy of an end board. You just go like play Fuba and a bunch of board breakers and try to summon Liger Dancer. The problem with Luna Light is as soon as people know what's going on, respect it, or it becomes worse. And I do see a lot of people now gravitating towards playing answers to it. Like people are considering playing Kaiju, Lava Golem, Steer modes if their decks can it, or other ways to out it. Like are getting creative, all sorts of different ways. Try and find a Lunalite Liger Dancer out for their deck that actually works. Pair that with some decks that sometimes are played with a lot of hand traps, like Draco Tail and Yummy can play a significant amount of hand traps, so you might not even get the combo. I think Lunalite is hard to evaluate, but I do think it is a deck that definitely has top tier potential. I think all of the stars actually align for Lunalite right now. A lot of things are looking for it, but the problem is everyone knows that, and if people much for it, then it might be top tier potential is here. Malice. Besides the fact that you should never play Malice, I think Malice is still a tier deck. I think I would rate it slightly lower than the combo Ryziel variation simply because I feel like it's slightly less consistent. And I don't know. I mean, one Dormouse and Splash Mage. The Splash Mage I feel like is a relatively because it just means that it's way more efficient to hand trap the deck now, and some of the combos are also going to be worse because single Malice combo went through Splash Mage at some point just to make your end board stronger as well. I do think getting rid of Splash Mage was an amazing decision. It makes the deck so much easier to actually interrupt. I think that's something that they are really gonna notice with Malice is that there's gonna be games play through that like Veiler Imperm combo anymore or that Ash Imperm combo anymore because you have that easy Splash Mage in the where you can't recover from the Nibiru so easily because you just make like Link Spider after and then Splash Mage with it and so on and so forth, right? I think there's probably going to be ways for it. You're going to see some experimentation with like extra extenders like Sky Striker cards and whatever, but I think what's left is probably like a tier 2 deck. The good news is people might play less Lancia now because Malice is not that popular, but at the same time, might still consider Lancia for decks like Crystron and Lunalight, depending on how powerful those end up being. If that's the case, Malice is now the deck that's being caught in the crossfire. If actually, I could see a world where people play Lancia for Lunalight and then just like it happens to be Malice, which is funny because the other way around, but that's just how things go sometimes. Memento! Memento is a deck that I'm personally a big fan of. I think the deck is just fine. I don't have much to say about it. I think it's one of the decks that potentially has K9 synergy and Memento thing. Yeah, I like it. I think it's still a pretty solid deck. I think it's nice because it kind of like does a little bit of the deck is fine into high impact hand traps, like the Charmies and which are definitely going to be played. Has the ability to push through low impact hand traps like Baylor Infirm Ash. Not every hand, but like a decent amount of hands will those. And it also has a way to play against board breakers. You know, it doesn't lose single Dark Ruler even Goblet pretty resilient to a lot of things, and I like that about it. So I think Memento is still going to be a fine
I didn't mean to do that.
Necross. Necross is the first deck I'm going to throw into tier 4.
What did
As
I
much as
what
my
did I
heart is
send?
bleeding right
I
now,
wasn't
and
paying
I'm probably
attention.
still going to bring it to once, I just haven't really seen a concept with the Necross cards that feels like it actually does enough and is actually, oh, I don't know, it's not it. Especially, it just gets in the crossfire for so many things. Like if people side deck roll and everything, one Herald of the Arclight, funnily enough, also hurts it sometimes because you do the Kaleidoscope into Unicorn once now, and after it's hit significantly worse later. That's kind of annoying. I think it used to play two Heralds. Orcus loses a couple of hybrid variations. You know, like you can longer as easily play stuff like Orcus Fiendsmith or Orcus meets the Root, a couple of bridges in Feral Imp and Evan, I think Orcus itself still operates relatively well in the environment that we're looking at. I think Orcus both solid boards, has solid grind game, and has the second if properly. Hypothetically, you can still play Orcus with Fiendsmith, or you can still play Orcus with Mitsuru. You don't have the bridge anymore, but if you draw, but they still interact well with each other. You just bridge into the other engine, so it can still be used to increase the ceiling and the consistency of the deck a little bit. Maybe even K9, sure. Maybe. I like Orcus. I still have to try it. I will say, when I tried pure Orcus a while ago, I thought it was not quite consistent enough. A secondary engine would be nice. Pure Orcus is probably going to be slightly too, but I still think it's a deck with solid tier. I don't think it's going to break into like the top like deck of the format, but I think it's fine. Less Lancia is also going to be good.
Ah,
Snake
I
Eyes.
got
I
rid of
include Snake
my
Eyes because
mill
Poplar and
thingy.
Ash went back to 3, but without original, you can't really do that much with other than just Snake Eye combo, and Poplar in itself is also not going to be anymore because Poplar into the field spell doesn't really do anything. I don't really see a way to Snake Eye. I've seen people Snake Eye with Yummy, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, honestly, because I feel like that's just adding more normal summons to the Yummy deck, which I don't think Yummy deck needs. I'm missing something there. I mean, you do probably feeling of Yummy that way. I don't know if Yummy needs that. I don't know if Yummy wants to play more bricks necessarily instead of on engine. As far as pure Snake Eyes goes, I don't. Mermail, I think goes right into. I think it's the perfect candidate for like SmackDown middle two. Pretty strong when it goes first. Still not the greatest deck into Charmies. Not the greatest deck into. Is still very valid to play. Very similar to stuff like White Forest and Ryzeal Onomat or Ryzeal Heraldic, like pretty hit or miss decks that are not my style. I don't personally love these decks, but I do see why some people like them, and I see that they are really scary to play against. They're going first. Punk is, in my opinion, a tier 3 strategy. I'm not a huge fan of the Punk deck. I think it is just a weaker version of other mid-rangey combo decks. I think it doesn't have much going for it. Now it also loses the bridge to Fiendsmith, like Punk Fiendsmith, that was a pretty solid. There's a world where you can play Punk 9 because it does have a level 5 monster in the deck that you can access things like your Buckle Live early one access to it, right? You can search level 5 and then special that and on. Like, not a huge fan of it. I think it doesn't play into words very well with the cards. I mean, you have an extender now. That's only one card in your deck, and if you don't manage to like resolve the Zeamin, you're not guaranteed to have it in your hand. And Mitsurugi. Mitsurugi is a top tier deck now. Of course, when I say Mitsurugi, are now limited to basically pure Mitsurugi. I think pure Mitsurugi is going way to go. It's still, I mean, it can still play Mitsurugi engines in other decks that rely on bridging it. I mean, in the past, we've seen people play Mitsurugi decks like Malice just because drawing Habakiri is insane. Or draw prayers and that card searches Habakiri and that card is crazy. And I think that's a viable strategy still, alongside just pure Mitsurugi deck, right? Like I really like Mitsurugi. I also think Mitsurugi has an exceptionally good matchup against Yami. I played against Mitsurugi a bunch at my regional yesterday. I played Yami, and let me tell you, that matchup is rough. Finds very well. I think Mitsurugi. I think and this is specifically why I'm attesting some potential to decks down here. Luna Light, Sky Striker, and Gem Knight, I think, have a pretty good time dealing with these decks up here. And I think this is an interesting dynamic to me that is hard to figure out and hard to evaluate for now. Decks like Sky Striker and Gem Knight could have a pretty easy time going second in decks like Draco Tail, Pure Mitsurugi, Yami, because their decks are all relatively breakable. And that's why I think those decks have high potential right now. But then maybe I think this development through, if people play these decks up here, there is an argument to be made to play decks that are more focused, like Nine Crystron, like Mermail, like White Forest, like Heraldic Ryzeal, exploit that people are playing decks like Gem Knight or Sky Striker, and we're sealing decks like Draco Tail and Mitsurugi and Yami that you may can overrun when you're going second. There's a world where people start playing really high ceiling decks, and then decks like Striker and Gem Knight aren't hit anymore, and decks like Draco Tail and Mitsu also get overrun. But Archmage, for now, chills in tier 3. Archmage, also one of the few decks that can still really access Fiendsmith because they have a spell card that turns a monster into I think any type of attribute that you want, so you can do anything a light fiend. So I think like stuff like Fiendsmith Archmage or K9 Archmage could be experimented with and maybe better than I'm giving it credit for,
Because
simply
they
because I
couldn't
haven't played those
refresh
specific
anymore?
versions. It's more
It's
like a guess
crazy.
of where it would be, but I haven't played it as much. Maybe, now that I'm saying it, maybe something like K9 Archmage or Archmage could be better than that. Yeah. Alright, and now I'm gonna give you guys